7th day, upper wind month, 1 CE, red or black?
Red, of course. What are we doing with the black ones?
Hanging them all around the walls. We can't have people staring at the inside of the hull. Leanne frowned at the pitch-black fabric over her arm, and then she looked at the barge's steel hull. Each component was as glossy as the day it had been imbued with its runes, dully reflecting the magical lighting placed about the hold.
Look, Leanne said. Normally I'd agree with you. Hell, I wouldn't even ask. But this is different. The entire ship's made out of steel, enchanted steel.
That's something you gotta show off.
Florian looked up from where she was sorting through a crate of paintings. That assumes they even have an appreciation for what they see, she said. Maybe dwarves, metalworkers and merchants would be able to tell at a glance, but we're talking about human nobles here. They're only going to see an ugly metal wall.
Grr. Grr. Florian gurred back.
This is just a backup, right?
Leanne said, just in case the country's level to the ground when we get there. Otherwise, it's our little secret base.
Some sort of news should have arrived if that had happened, unless it had happened recently.
Still, news of dire developments indicating a turn for the worse should have come through well in advance. Since that hadn't happened, things were probably following the usual back and forth between the Draconic Kingdom and their beastman neighbors. With that being the case, they should be decorating things to suit their own preferences and not those of others. One of the barges in their fleet had been set aside to use as an emergency office. Its cargo hold had been converted into a work area in one half and a shared bedroom in the other. A kitchen and rooms for some household staff had been installed into the bridge structure. They would use it for as long as necessary, but chances were that they wouldn't use it at all, so it was more of an experiment in functionality and design for future vessels. Leanne tossed a crimson bolt of cloth from the crate in front of her onto a nearby couch. A flicker of movement caught her eye and she turned to see a shadow demon floating at the bottom of the stairs to the main deck.
"What's going on?" she asked. "This one has come with a delivery." The glowing yellow gash that was its mouth split open as it spoke. "Compliments of Lord Demiurge." The shadow demon produced a ceramic jar a bit larger than Leanne's palm. She picked it up and read the label. "Wow, he actually found some." "Found some what?" Florian came over. She held up the jar at eye level. Florian's eyes scanned the label. Their time wandering around Ludmilla's territory had baked the both of them even more, so the delivery of the difficult-to-obtain eraser cream was a welcome thing. "Does it work?" "Dunno," Leanne said. "Let's see." Leanne fished out a handkerchief from her infinite haversack and unscrewed the lid of the jar. She sniffed the white cream inside experimentally before covering her fingers with the handkerchief to scoop some of it out. She went over to rub a bit on a painting that Florian had selected. The area around where she applied the cream vanished, leaving a stretch of clear canvas. "Whoa, is this safe for people to use?" "It looks like it worked. It stripped the paint right off that thing. That can't be healthy. I was right to call it disintegration cream. Just try a bit." "A bit? Who would try a bit of something that can do that?" Leanne scooped out some more. She stared at it for a long moment before her eyes slid over to the shadow demon. It fled up the stairs the moment she raised her fingers towards it. "See?" Leanne said, "even demons are scared of this stuff." "I'm fairly certain that it was scared of you," Florian told her. "Huh? Why? This stuff was made by the Holy Queen, right? Maybe it has some holy stuff in it that demons don't like. Hey, we should try rubbing some on Ludmilla." Florian snatched the jar from her hands. She sniffed the cream carefully before applying some to her forearm. "I can't believe you could just smear that stuff on after seeing that," Leanne said. "It's from Lord Demiurge," Florian replied. "He wouldn't purposely bring genuine harm to his allies." "How do you know that?" "He told me." Leanne frowned a long frown at Florian. "Are you suggesting that Lord Demiurge lied to me?" Florian asked. "He's a devil," Leanne answered. "Weren't you the one accusing me of being racist the other day? He might be a devil, but he's a nice, reliable man." The tanned skin of Florian's arm lightened to its usual complexion. In addition to returning to normal, it had become more beautiful somehow. Her friend smiled. "See?" she said, "there was nothing to worry about. Come to the bedroom and help me make sure I get everything. You're doing me too, right?"
Of course, Florine rolled her eyes. Let's get this done quick, we still have a lot of work to do. 2 hours later, they finished figuring out arrangements for the office and returned to the main deck. It was yet another sunny evening in the Duchy of Erantle and a refreshing breeze swept over Corlin Harbour. All but the vessel that they were on and the one assigned to transport goods from Warden's Vale had already been loaded and sent to the refurbished harbours in Lagos. Their surroundings had returned to the quiet port of previous months, though the equipment for the new cargo system stood by silently for its next job. How? Kya? Leanne nearly jumped overboard. Heart trying to leap out of her throat, she turned to shout at Ludmilla. Don't creep up on me like that. I didn't creep up on you, Ludmilla replied. I was already standing here. If I really wanted to, I could. Let's not go over what horrors you'd visit on me, Leanne said. We already have enough trouble ahead of us to think about. Friend or not, scary was scary. Leanne already suspected that they would have nightmares from their work in the Draconic Kingdom. A country that was regularly raided by predatory demi-humans was bound to have disturbing scenes aplenty. Do you truly believe it will be that bad? Ludmilla asked. You heard that blacksmith of yours, Leanne answered. Unlike our cute and cuddly demi-human friends here in the Sorceress Kingdom, we're going to be dealing with the demi-humans that everyone imagines demi-humans to be. You won't be, Ludmilla told her. I will. Only after things are secure will you three be brought in. That might be so, Leanne said, but we're still gonna see the aftermath of whatever's been going on. Her stomach grew queasy just thinking about it. Whenever bards rendered tales in human lands, demi-humans were divided into 3 broad categories. The first were the ones that were portrayed as minor threats, demi-humans that were most common in their region of the world and were characterized as some combination of weak, stupid, chaotic, brutish and unsophisticated. Races like ogres and goblins that were defeated hundreds or even thousands at a time in exciting tales of adventure. Leanne tended to think that they were used in stories to make humans feel better about themselves, give them some ubiquitous foes that could be dangerous but were outmatched by human intellect, artifice and discipline. When the Sorcerer's Kingdom annexed Erantle and demi-humans started arriving to reside in the city, however, she found that the very same demi-humans being slaughtered in those stories enjoyed those stories greatly as well. She had no idea how to feel about it and couldn't even begin to understand why that was. Another category consisted of the demi-humans that were so powerful that they may as well be monsters. True giants such as frost giants, sea giants, fire giants, stone giants and storm giants were included in their number, as were races like the Orthress, Zoastia, and Nagaraja. Since they may as well be monsters, they were framed as such and thus there was a sense of detachment from the threat that they represented. They were treated as a force of nature that regular people stayed safely away from, a monumental challenge for heroes to overcome. Finally came the demi-humans that seemed to be handpicked from the primal nightmares of humanity. Beings of savage intelligence and cunning who saw humans as nothing more than helpless prey to be picked off and eaten at their leisure. The Beastman Kingdom neighboring the Draconic Kingdom was primarily populated by this sort of demi-human, and all Leanne could think about were the gruesome and horrifying tales that were attached to them. There might not be as much of an aftermath as you think, Florine said. They may be holding out just fine and we've been instructed to time things for maximum effect, yes? We shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. Regardless of what we find, Ludmilla said. It is what it is. Our duties remain unchanged. A twinge of envy rose out of Leanne's discomforting thoughts. She wished that she could have even a tenth of her friend's unflinching resolve. Where's Clara? Florine asked. She stayed at home, Ludmilla answered. That's weird, Leanne said. Clara always sticks to you whenever she can. That only happens when our time together is limited, Ludmilla replied. She obviously can't stick to me every hour of every day. If she heard that, she'd take it as a challenge. They disembarked from the ship, making their way over to an awaiting carriage. The Solita took them out of the harbour and up onto the highway at a casual canter, passing several slower vehicles on the way to Castle Corlin. How long did you wait for us? Florine asked. Not more than half an hour, Ludmilla answered. It wasn't a problem. You could have come down to join us, Leanne said. Did you stand at the top of the stairs the entire time? You might be undead now, but you're not a Death Series servitor. I was taking advantage of the opportunity to watch the harbour, Ludmilla replied. The Draconic Kingdom is a coastal nation, so it's probably a good thing to get accustomed to similar environments.
The ever-vigilant frontier noble. It felt that, rather than her undead state changing her, it allowed Ludmilla to become more Ludmilla. She was always a sort of constant back when they were kids, but she was even more so now. While it was reassuring to have such a friend, Leanne couldn't help but feel guilty over the sense that Ludmilla did her best for everyone even when no one was watching or even aware of it. They would never know how much they truly owed her because she was about as forthcoming as a boulder at the bottom of a waterlogged ditch when it came to her personal achievements. Lady Shiltier said that even undead get mentally weary, Florine noted. You should relax a bit while you can.
I can relax when I'm fighting, and there will probably be plenty of that.
Or not. I take everything back. She's a battle maniac. How can fighting be relaxing? Florine gave Ludmilla a perplexed look.
Everyone is trying to hurt you.
Everyone is trying to kill me,
Ludmilla corrected her. If I were to describe it, being in a battle is like reading a good book.
Maybe.
Leanne and Florine stared incomprehensibly at the crazy woman sitting across from them.
Ludmilla visibly squirmed under their combined gaze. It just comes naturally to me, she said. I don't have to think about every little thing.
It's not as if I'm just mindlessly fighting, either. There are goals to work toward along the way, and what I do affects meaningful change. Surely you too have things that you enjoy that might seem stressful to others.
Maybe, Leanne said. But we don't leave a bloody trail of corpses in our wake.
That's not true,
Florine said.
Leanne turned to look at her childhood friend.
It's not?
Just because we don't kill people directly doesn't mean that we don't affect the lives of many with what we do.
We love to socialize, negotiate, grow our fiefs and see to the ventures that we charter. Every contract, whether we agree to it or not, influences everyone involved and those involved with them and so on. As merchants, we seek to grow our businesses, but there are many hidden costs that we aren't aware of.
But that's how it always is, Leanne said.
That's right, Florine replied. It is.
But most merchants are small and powerless, as are most nobles. We aren't small in that sense anymore, nor are we powerless, and we get bigger and more powerful every day. One day, no, now, the stroke of a pen can just as easily save millions or seal their fates. In a single moment, we can destroy more than what would take Ludmilla an entire water match. We can't think like little merchants or nobles anymore. We need to think big like Clara, understand as much as we can about what our choices may bring about and whether the outcomes of those choices are ultimately what we want to achieve. In just a year, we have gotten to the point where we can act and the world transforms. It is both exciting and frightening at the same time, and only our superiors and those closest to us see the change that we are going to unleash upon the world.
What were we talking about again?
Leanne asked.
Relaxing, Ludmilla answered.
The carriage rolled to a stop in front of the entrance to Clara's home. A pair of House Corlin's footmen opened the carriage doors and led them inside, where they found their ladies' maids awaiting them. The three of them looked somewhat disgruntled at being left behind, but there was more work for them to do in the palace than there was in the harbor.
Did anything happen while we were away?
Leanne asked.
An elder lich from the royal army reported 4 wyverns crossing over the Katza plains, Rose answered. They should be here by sunset.
Leanne exchanged looks with Florine and Ludmilla. It seemed that Chief Venomscale was on his way. They split up to prepare for the wyvern riders' arrival. Leanne and Florine used the facilities in the staterooms on the 3rd floor before meeting on the palace roof. Their steps slowed as they approached the large building at the end of the long walkway leading from the stairs. Since Lady Shiltier now had a number of vassals in the duchy, she decided to construct an official, physical court in Clara's rooftop garden. It was a central location for the 4 of them and, while affording them distance from the capital, it was not far from Eranthal. As signs of minor houses, the idea of a physical court held an undeniable allure. It was a locale that they could never have frequented in their old lives, a place of power and influence beyond their meager means. A vampire bride awaited them at the front of the building. Rather than having a single set of doors at the front, it had 2, one leading north and the other leading south. The vampire bride gestured toward the northern doors before leading them down a 5-meter-long hallway to another set of doors. Through them was a modestly furnished drawing room that measured 5 meters to a side. This room is as far as your ladies' maids are allowed to go, the vampire bride said. There are sleeping chambers in the back should they require them. Miss Aramis and Miss Lutzi are in an identical area opposite this one. They may visit with one another if they wish. Leanne and Florine stopped and looked at the vampire bride. These instructions are from our mistress, the vampire bride explained. For future reference, only your ladies' maids and personal shadow demons are allowed on the rooftop garden out of your respective households.
That's,
very exclusive? To personally attend to Lady Sheltier is an honor which is second only to attending to His Majesty the Sorcerer King, the vampire bride replied. Only those closest to our mistress are permitted to enter the chambers within. Their shadow demons separated from them, moving to meld into the shadows of the room. The vampire bride turned to bring Leanne and Florine through another pair of doors that led further inside. They followed the next hallway south, which led to another pair of doors. That's 4 sets of doors so far, Leanne said. Why are there so many? So the sounds from inside do not escape, the vampire bride replied. Our mistress can be quite energetic, at times. We can use magic to soundproof things, yeah? Using magic to solve everything lacks elegance, the vampire bride told them. Physical things are more sensuous. But those clean items that you provided were very nice. Certain stains and odors are very difficult to remove without them. They found a small, dimly lit antechamber past the 4th set of doors. Opposite a long plush bench was another set of doors carved out of the same, pure white limestone of the palace walls. The court of Lady Sheltier Bloodfallen, the vampire bride told them. Lady Zaradnik and Lady Corlin are already inside. I've been thinking, Leanne said, if this is Lady Sheltier's court, but no one but a select few can enter, how does she hold court with petitioners who aren't a part of those select few? Crimson light from the vampire bride's crimson eyes winked in the dim lighting as she tilted her head curiously and blinked several times. Why would our mistress see those whom she does not wish to see? Did that make any sense? Courts were places where a noble conducted business both mundane and extraordinary. It was where they were at their most powerful and all that they were was brought to bear on those who came to see them. Lady Sheltier was impressive enough without needing any of that, and since she was something like a martial noble, she was not at her most powerful in any civilian court, but on the battlefield. Maybe it's like an office? This is quite exciting, isn't it? Florine said, it's like a dream come to life. While Florine's thoughts seemed to be in an entirely different place than Leanne's, she had to admit that it was. They had gone from unexpectedly inheriting their humble houses to becoming the counselors of a High Lord so stupendously powerful that they didn't even bother trying to imagine the extent of her power. It was beyond a dream and she couldn't quite figure out how it happened. They just worked like crazy and suddenly they were here. When dreams become reality, Leanne mused, what new dreams await? The doors whispered open as the vampire bride pressed her palms against them. Leanne felt a brush against her fingers and she gripped Florine's hand as they entered. It didn't matter what came, so long as her friends were with her. Veils of gossamer silks were draped from the ceiling, obscuring the interior from them. They followed the vampire bride over the polished white floors as the lighting grew even dimmer. The barest traces of a sweet fragrance lingered in the air, one that seemed to heighten her senses as she made out the details of the chamber. The doorway led into an open area roughly 8 meters wide and 10 meters long. On the sides of that area, the floor was elevated a meter above it. Straight ahead, the floor was 2 meters high and a large plush chair, or was it a small throne? Loomed over the court. A set of stairs provided access to the area above on her right and left. Tall shelves lined the walls, between which 4 openings obscured in the same gossamer silks led to rooms beyond. A pair of desks lined either side of the approach to the throne. On the south side, Clara and Ludmilla gazed down from where they were seated behind theirs. Where's Lady Sheltier? Leanne asked. The vampire bride quietly cleared her throat. When within these chambers, she said, you shall refer to her as Mistress Sheltier, or simply Mistress. Mistress Sheltier is not in, Clara said. Mistress Sheltier will arrive when Mistress Sheltier's court finishes receiving its furnishings, Ludmilla added. Those 2 desks across from us are yours, by the way. Leanne released Florine's hand, making her way up the set of 3 steps to her right. She drew aside the nearly transparent silks dividing the way to one of the chambers. It appeared to be empty. What goes in here? Leanne asked. That's Florine's chamber, Clara answered. Yours is the other one on that side. That means the desk over there is mine? Yes. She walked along the bookshelves behind their desks, both of which were fashioned from polished obsidian. Rather than a chair, each had a lounge bench that was raised on one end. Leanne checked the drawers of her desk, which were as empty as the desktop. Her room was empty too. She gazed up at the chair overlooking the court, then to what looked like a huge bed behind it. "That's Lady Mistress Shiltier's seat up there?"
"Yes," Ludmilla replied.
"We aren't allowed up there unless our mistress grants us permission to join her."
Leanne nodded to herself.
Overall, it had the nice, stratified feeling of a court with clearly defined rules and boundaries. She seated herself at her desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and testing the writing surface. It was too hard for her tastes.
"What can we bring in here?" Leanne asked.
"Work," Ludmilla answered, "personal effects, a small wardrobe, we can have food delivered as well."
"But we have to get it at the door,
so we're basically ladies in waiting here?" That was at least something they were all trained to do from childhood. Ludmilla nodded. "The vampire brides will see to most of it, but we are to act in that function if necessary and if called upon." "What other rules are there?" "Our mistress is still thinking about it," Ludmilla smirked. "We just heard the ones you were told about just now when we came up here." "I thought to have Chief Venomscale land on the roof here," Clara said.
"But we'll have to receive him elsewhere."
Leanne bounced several times in her seat and then turned to lay down. It was pretty comfortable. She stared at the ceiling, which was painted black and obscured in more layers of gossamer. The magical lighting nestled within the silken folds overhead shone through dimly with soft red light.
"Who else is allowed in here, by the way?"
Leanne asked. "Aside from us," Ludmilla answered, "His Majesty the Sorcerer King, Lady Aura, Lord Mayor, Elishnish and the Vampire Brides."
"That's it?"
"For now. Our mistress will invite individuals as she sees fit, of course. It's most likely that we'll be entertaining the vast majority of dignitaries in the palace facilities below," Clara said. "These chambers are for her inner circle." "Oh," Florine said, "that's just the thing you love, isn't it, Leanne? A secret base." "I guess." With Chief Venomscale due to arrive, they rose from their seats and left the court. Their maids and shadow demons rejoined them as they went outside. "If Lady Shiltier's court is here," Leanne said, "does that mean this is Lady Shalar Mistress Garden? What's she gonna put here?" "I think she's leaving it to Lord Mayor," Clara replied. "Though she did say something about a pool." "A pool?" The way that she described it, it sounded like a large, open-air bath. Leanne frowned at the mental image, scanning the surroundings. People wouldn't be able to see them from below, but the Elder Lich patrols flying around would get a good eyeful. "She wants us to run around naked outside?" "Our mistress mentioned that there were special outfits for it," Clara said. "And something about Mizushikai." She looked at Ludmilla, who shook her head unknowingly. Maybe it was some sort of ritual from wherever Lady Shiltier came from. Their liege was a cleric, after all. "What do we have planned for Chief Venomscale?" "Default, for now," Clara shook her head. "I should have asked you too about it. Is there anything we should avoid?" "Like the other human cultures in the region," Florian said, "they have a patriarchal structure of governance and inheritance. Families, however, are matrifocal." "To what degree does this affect power dynamics?" "Quite a bit more than ours," Florian replied. "Their tribal laws are mostly founded in the practicalities of their environment. This is merely conjecture, but they haven't reached a stage where arbitrary constructs based on tradition have consolidated political and economic power to men. Their treatment of us during our visit was better than we received in the Empire or even with our own subjects." By better, Florian meant egalitarian. The prejudices and expectations of women ingrained into the northern human cultures were next to non-existent in the Wyvern Rider tribes, which felt pretty weird to Leanne. It also meant that they wouldn't give women any of the gentlemanly considerations they were accustomed to unless they were pregnant. During their stay in their territories, Leanne and Florian had to carry their own things around and there was no such thing as ladies first. "But there aren't any specific roles expected of various professions, yes?" Clara asked. "They won't take offense at being attended to by my household staff or have any hierarchical constructs that demand a certain order to things?" "There is a respect for seniority," Florian answered, "both in terms of age and vocational mastery. Our version of diplomatic decorum should serve. Since you've resorted to the default reception, they should behave in close approximation to polite guests here." A default reception referred to the regular hospitality that a noble provided to their guests. Regardless of their social standing, they were fed, afforded accommodations and guaranteed protection for the duration of their stay. So long as they behaved themselves, of course. That's what we have to work with. Then, let me know if you sense that I'm doing something wrong. You too, Ludmilla. Me? The Wyvern Rider tribes are a warrior culture, I think. Clara looked over to Leanne and Florine, who nodded in return. If that's the case, Clara said, you'll probably notice many things that we don't. You're always going on about the differences between martial cultures and civilian ones, aren't you? They went out into the Eastern Palace, where they found Dix waiting for them in the atrium. Have we figured out where we'll be receiving their wyverns? Clara asked. Atop the palace gatehouse, the elder lich answered. They will arrive within 30 minutes. 20 minutes later, they watched as 4 wyverns made a circular descent over the killing field of Corlin Castle. The large, dragon-like creatures alighted along the ramparts, gripping the stone with hind claws that could easily grasp Leanne around the waist. A man with a bronze tan beneath his olive-scaled vest smoothly dismounted, landing lightly before them. Didn't you say that the air was cold when you flew around? It is. Those tattoos that they have confer all sorts of enchantments. One of them does endure elements. The tattoos in question were shamanic totems inked in intricate detail over their toned, muscular bodies. They served as marks of veterancy amongst warriors. Chief Venomscale had 7 of them and each of the other riders had at least 5. The other men arrayed themselves behind the chief, open hands hanging loose at their sides. Hi Chief Wagner, the Wyvern Rider chief said in his soft, yet firm voice. The task is complete. Chief Venomscale took off the satchel hanging over his shoulder, holding it out towards her by its leather strap. Leanne produced a pouch of gold trade coins from her infinite haversack. Did you, Runa, fly into any trouble? Whether we did or did not does not alter our agreement. Chief Venomscale peered at her with his azure eyes. You speak differently from the last time. She's just trying to make small talk, Florine smiled, providing an opening for banter and indicating her willingness to renegotiate the agreement if unforeseen difficulties arose. There is no need, the chief told them. All was as anticipated. They made the exchange and Chief Venomscale started counting out the coins right in front of them. Clara looked over at Leanne. What's going on? You didn't do something when you first met them, did you? What? Of course not. Well, kinda. Clara frowned. We just talked about trade here and I mentioned how some people might try and cheat others. They're being careful like we told them to. Ludmilla reached out and pulled a scroll out of the satchel in Leanne's hands. They don't have merchants? If they had brought one it would have saved them the trouble. Nothing like ours. They have a barter economy and coinage doesn't mean much to them since they mostly keep to themselves. It'll take some time for them to open up to our stuff. Another scroll left the satchel. Then another. With each, the furrow on Ludmilla's brow deepened. What's wrong? Florine asked. In response, Ludmilla retrieved the satchel and knelt to the stone. She unfurled the scrolls, which were each a small map, piecing them together into a larger whole. Leanne, Florine and Clara leaned forward to examine it. The map of the Draconic Kingdom was as Leanne had requested, detailing not only urban centers and major roads as merchant maps did, but also a detailed accounting of forests, plains, hills, rivers and lakes. In addition, what the Wyvern Riders could identify of the Beastman Kingdom's forces was included. Except. This can't be right, can it? Leanne said. How does this work? The lines mark the extent of the Beastman Kingdom's advance. Ludmilla's fingers traced the map. A few different armies have gathered to besiege those cities and towns there. But what about the rest? Clara said, those armies are nearly up to the Katza Plains. Are they ignoring everything else? As Clara had noted, the maps were clear save for where markings were made around roughly half the urban centers of the Draconic Kingdom. Of the defending forces, there was no sign. No, Ludmilla shook her head. This war is essentially over. All the beastmen have to do is take those cities and their conquest will be complete. What? Leanne nearly shouted, how did we not hear anything? There should have been some news of the war's progress, especially if it's become this bad. Of the 9 cities of the Draconic Kingdom, the 5 in the southern half were taken and the remaining 4 were surrounded. The towns on the sea were also under siege, But if the beastmen had gotten that far, there was no reason to believe that the towns would last. Strangely, the map showed the Draconic Kingdom in an otherwise pristine condition. The sort of information you've been listening for is the type that flows through arteries of trade, Ludmilla said. But if the beastmen have pinched off those arteries, you won't get anything at all. No merchants, no envoys, no refugees, nothing. Still, Clara said, this is beyond historical precedent. The Draconic Kingdom has never come close to being conquered before. If my information is accurate, past beastman incursions amounted to major raids at worst. High Chief Wagner, Chief Venomscale said. Who are these women? Leanne looked up from the map. Her gaze followed the chief's outstretched hand. Ah, my apologies, she straightened and reordered herself. The lady on the left is High Chief Clara Odelia Dale Corlin. The one on the right is Chief Ludmilla Zaradnik. High Chief Corlin, Chief Zaradnik, Chief Waryu and Venomscale. Why are we High Chief and Chief? She glanced over at Ludmilla. Because that's how it comes out in their culture. They don't have an equivalent term, so it comes back to us like that. Our different forms of governance aren't going to cause any problems? Well, it's just us. We can be flexible. Chief Venomscale stepped aside, motioning to the men behind him. This is Cole, of the Green Rapids tribe. Oracle, of the Broken Pillar tribe. Tenmin, of the Eastern Lake tribe. I have brought them with me at your urging. They're not chiefs? He'd name them if they were. Probably representatives or curious guys. Clara stepped forward with a warm smile, spreading her skirts in a graceful curtsy. Welcome to the Sorceress Kingdom, she said, and welcome to Castle Corlin. We have arranged hospitality for you and your companions, Chief Venomscale. I pray you will forgive us for any misunderstandings that may occur due to our cultural differences. We will partake of your hospitality, High Chief Corlin, Chief Venomscale replied. Is there a place for our wyverns? What do they require? The wyvern rider chief turned to look at their surroundings. A high place that cannot easily be reached from the ground, he said. Aside from that, shelter from the elements should storms come our way. In that case, Clara said, you may use the dragon aviary on the east point of the island. Dragon. As one the men looked around at the sky. It's unoccupied at the moment, Clara told them. We can bring a meal for your wyverns as well. Chief Venomscale and his companions nodded before remounting to take wing. Clara ordered her household to deliver several racks of mutton to the aviary. I wonder if they'll take the wagons back with the footmen, Clara mused. I wonder. Leanne smirked, then looked back down to the pieced-together maps. What are we going to do about this? Our objectives haven't changed, Clara replied. Even when things are like this. Secure the Draconic Kingdom. Establish amicable diplomatic relations. Open new markets for the Sorceress Kingdom. Build a platform from which they could launch the next stage of their assault. Shouldn't we be acting right now? Florine asked. The entire Draconic Kingdom is nearly gone. We should get as much information as we reasonably can while we have Chief Venomscale with us, Clara answered. Our preparations are already well underway, so rushing won't gain us anything. Remember what I told you in the Our Winter Slave Market? Florine frowned down at the map, releasing a quiet sigh. If you plan on saving people, she said, you must make sure to do it properly. That's right, Clara's tone was grim. This is not a bard's tale. Ending the Beastman invasion does not mean happily ever after for the Draconic Kingdom. What do you think, Ludmilla? Leanne shifted uncomfortably as Florine turned to Ludmilla for another answer. Rationally speaking, Clara was correct. Still, Leanne didn't like it when her best friend was so distressed. I have questions about this map, Ludmilla replied. It suggests all sorts of things and I'm not sure that anyone here will like the answer. Is it that bad? That depends on what bad means. Simply put, this is not a conflict between human nations and the considerations for each side will be characteristic of the relationship between the Draconic Kingdom and the Beastman Kingdom. She wasn't certain what Ludmilla was saying, but Leanne had a sense that the frontier noble was trying to spare them something unpleasant. Regardless, what mattered was that some legitimate remnant of the Draconic Kingdom's government remained intact for the Sorceress Kingdom to deal with. By legitimate, they meant someone who could present their claim on the land so that the Sorceress Kingdom could act at their request. This meant that the entire population could be decimated so long as someone in the nation's hierarchy could be rescued, protected and used to justify military action. It didn't matter if it was a city, just the queen, a distant relative or even the cousin's cousin of a bastard's bastard. Of course, starting from that point meant that the market they secured would be tiny, but there were advantages in any situation. In one case, the Sorcerer King had secured a thriving, healthy population in the form of the Empire, and it was slowly being turned into a productive participant in the Sorceress Kingdom's hegemony. On the other extreme, His Majesty had secured the Dwarf Kingdom in the Azalisia Mountains, which had been reduced to a shadow of its former self and teetered on the verge of total annihilation. Considering their progress with the two countries so far, it seemed that gratuitous amounts of pain, suffering and loss made it easier to overcome rigid old biases, break through cultural barriers and build new bridges. If a nation entered into a relationship from a safe and comfortable position, as was the case with the Empire, a seemingly endless number of things obstructed mutual growth and progress. It was better to construct a new house with better engineering, architecture and access to infrastructure rather than attempt to renovate an old one with all of its faults, quirks and shortfalls. In the case of a nation, it was trying to do so while the residents were still living inside and resisting change. Even if they didn't resist, they had to be worked around. In 2 lightning swift, diplomatically speaking, moves, the Sorcerer King had provided 2 case studies that demonstrated these principles in practice. Considering that His Majesty was a being of unmatched intellect, wisdom and foresight, he had probably done so on purpose, establishing early precedents for their nation's foreign policy. As expected of His Majesty, Leanne murmured. No, Leanne glanced at Florine. Ludmilla is more familiar with His Majesty than we are, plus she's accustomed to dealing with demi-humans on a more, assertive level, so her intuition is probably kicking in as to how we should see things. Clara's also right, it doesn't matter how easy or hard things appear to be, our task remains the same. We just have to do what needs to be done according to the situation. That's why we're the ones doing it. Lady Shiltier was no slouch, either. While it might have seemed to outsiders that she was simply gathering flowers for her private garden, she was also assembling a team of talented individuals who could operate autonomously to carry out the Sorceress Kingdom's policies. Clara was their mastermind, a Grand Master artisan who crafted expansive geo-economic and socio-political strategies, creating a grand stage upon which the Sorceress Kingdom's agents could operate. While they were all innovators in their own ways, Leanne specialized in industrial technologies and their applications, laying new foundations for the economic power that fueled their advance. Though they were all well-versed in diplomacy, Florian's empathetic nature and overflowing charisma swept away the barriers of race and culture. No, that wasn't the right way to put it. Rather than sweeping away, she was like a gentle current that embraced race and culture and carried everything together towards whatever destination she envisioned. Ludmilla had many of the same intuitive and empathetic qualities as Florian, but tended to employ them aggressively. As a frontier noble, most saw her for her martial role, but she was far more than that. She was raised to be a vanguard of civilization, and it appeared that it could just as easily mean a multiracial one as the human one she was born into. Ludmilla observed a mysterious balance that seemed to dominate her perception and dictated her uncannily holistic approach to everything. Ilishnish was the perfect infiltrator in a world with a myriad of races. This not only referred to her ability to seemingly take on the appearance of any race, but in the fact that her draconic nature and talent as a bard seemed to blend into a perfect mix for her work as a covert agent. Between them, they could sow chaos or bring order on demand, tearing down nations or building them up. Together, they were the shadow cast by the very same wings that had taken them in. That shadow would surely grow until it had cast itself over the entire world. We should wait for them in the palace reception area, Florian said. Why? Leanne asked. So they don't think we were watching them embarrass themselves, Florian answered. Powerful undead like ours aren't so easy to get used to. But that's half the fun, Leanne said. Watching people react to the undead is great. Back when they went to the Wyvern Rider territories, Florian had similarly kept the undead away. The two of them walked into the Misty Valley with their shadow demons as their sole escort and relied on pure diplomatic acumen and salesmanship to get their foot in the door. While that was fun too, Leanne still thought it was better when she had powerful undead servitors looming behind her. They're not here for your entertainment, Florian said. You know as well as I that shattering someone's sense of dignity and security will more often than not have them aggressively react to compensate. This is especially true if you attack an image that they believe needs to be maintained. But that's the other half of the fun? Florine rolled her eyes and turned westward. She hopped off of the wall and her shadow demon appeared to glide her toward the palace. Leanne eyed the pair as they drifted gently over the front gardens. Could she do that? Maybe her shadow demon would let her go splat out of spite. Ludmilla stepped up to the edge of the battlements beside Leanne. Oh, me. They turned to see Clara holding her arms out towards Ludmilla like a needy child. Ludmilla smiled and reached out to pick up Clara by the waist. Clara's beaming expression lasted for about as long as it took Ludmilla to twist around and hurl Clara towards the palace. An undignified screech trailed after the radiant jewel of the Riverlands as she sailed through the air. That scream hasn't changed since I tossed her into the river. Leanne watched Clara overtake Florine. It was then that she noticed that Ludmilla had turned her attention to her. I wonder what sort of noises you'll make was written all over her face. Wait, Leanne took a step back. I'll just you. The human javelin by the name of Leanne Wagner arced through the air. Her arms went out instinctively as if she could balance herself in flight. She felt something grasp her underarms and Leanne suddenly found her feet back under her as she floated across the garden. As Ludmilla floated down to join them, Leanne combined her pout with Clara's. Why did you do that? Leanne asked. I wanted to see if it would work, Ludmilla answered. What if it didn't? All three of you have damage reduction belts, the friend flinger replied. You're all much tougher now as well, despite being civilians. You'd get away with minor injuries at worst. Didn't you throw yourself in front of a speeding wagon back in the autumn to find out what would happen? I did, Leanne admitted, but I did it to myself. You already threw Clara anyway, why would you do me too? If anyone was to be thrown, it should be Clara. Clara was the designated projectile of their group. Unless. Is she trying to get me too? Just like she got Clara? Conversion by throwing? Leanne swallowed. I was refining my technique, Ludmilla replied. Besides, you and Clara think too much and trust too little. It is better to get some things over with rather than agonize over them indefinitely. Ludmilla is right, Florine smiled and nodded. It was for the best. Our shadow demons are strong and reliable. No lasting harm would have befallen you. It's a good thing my bladder isn't weak like Adelia's, Leanne grumbled. Countess Volkenheim is pregnant. They retreated indoors, crossing the atrium to the western half of the palace. The grand stairs that bridged the main floor of the eastern section to the second floor of the western section led them to a large antechamber before the Great Hall. Since Clara conducted her domestic affairs in the administrative half, the palace's Great Hall was reserved for ceremonial functions. As the Countess of Corlin had no noble vassals, the space served to hold balls, banquets and exhibitions while Rantel was still waiting for the appropriate facilities to be built. Lining the north and south of the Great Hall were side halls for secondary functions, conferences and exhibits. I forgot how stupid huge this place looks when it's empty, Leanne said. We're not gonna eat at a tiny table in the middle, are we? Of course not, Clara replied. We'll use a hall in one of the staterooms on the third floor. By the way, do either of you know whether each member of Chief Venomscale's party would like their own staterooms, or would they rather stay together? They live in communal homes, Florine said, but I think it would be better to ask them directly. It's poor form to assume that they would like something just because they must deal with it in normal circumstances. Clara led them up the right stairs from the antechamber, which led to a balcony overlooking the Great Hall. They entered the first stateroom and settled on a set of lounge chairs in the drawing room. Like the rest of the palace, the chambers of the stateroom were all magically lit and heated, and each one was furnished to such a luxurious degree that the best suites of the shining golden pavilion paled in comparison. Leanne relaxed in her seat, eyeing Clara and Ludmilla's long legs sticking out across from her. Now that I think about it, Leanne said, is the furniture going to be appropriate for these guys? What do you mean? Ludmilla asked. They're all short, Leanne explained. You two are giants by comparison. Chief Venomscale was the tallest in his party and he was a bit shorter than Leanne. They all stood at around 155 centimeters, making them roughly a head taller than the average dwarf or quagga. It didn't look like they had a complex about their height, but, at the same time, The wrong line of thought about why everything was a certain way could lead to all sorts of problems.
They're not so fragile as that, Florine said. As long as we focus on our business with them, we'll be fine. On that note, I still believe that we should hurry. I'll be heading out after we have dinner and confirm the information that they brought with them, Ludmilla said. The Draconic Kingdom is larger than I expected. Perhaps it is like that for any place one only knows by name. From now on, we need to have this sort of information far in advance of making any moves. Trying to make maps at that level of detail will get you stabbed by the locals, Leanne said. It wasn't as if we could buy them from a market stall. That is no longer an excuse for us, Ludmilla told them. We're not powerless minor nobles any longer, but we're still acting as minor nobles would. Everything we're doing now is so big, but our situational awareness is still the same as before. It's like trying to sprint through a forest when we can only see a meter in front of our faces. We have the resources to do more than just sift through rumors that drift along the avenues of trade and travel. Leanne crossed her legs, flicking her pale yellow skirts over her knees. It appeared that the surprising revelations brought by Chief Venomscale's maps had indeed affected Ludmilla, despite her outwardly calm reaction. Whenever a significant enough problem arose, the frontier noble always wanted to fix it immediately. The intensity of everything that she did turned into a tangible pressure that squeezed on those around her. You're right that we should start doing more, Clara said, but keep in mind that we cannot do everything at once. There will always be someone or something somewhere in the world who could have benefited from our actions had we known about them and had we been there. Ludmilla sighed, drumming her fingers over her thigh. Then do we have anything that can help us in the Draconic Kingdom? She asked. Stopping the Beastman invasion and pushing them out should not be impossible, but, as you say, our problems begin after that. What resources do we have to deploy in the Draconic Kingdom that will help us stay apprised of what is going on while we work? We'll be cooperating with the Draconic Kingdom's authorities, Clara answered. That should be sufficient to start with. Once we can get our merchant companies in, we'll have a more complete picture of things. How long until Elishnish is back? Leanne asked. She can dig up all sorts of stuff for us that merchants would otherwise miss or not care about. She should be close to our window by now, Ludmilla answered. The merchant she is traveling with doesn't go faster than any other merchant, so I don't expect her to return to the Sorceress Kingdom for another 3 weeks. Couldn't we get someone to message her? Elishnish isn't there on some sort of recreational retreat, Ludmilla frowned. She's performing duties assigned to her by Lady Schultier. After that, she has to get her vassals started in her territory. A month is still better than nothing, Florine said. Besides, we'll be there for much longer than a month. A project that involves an entire nation isn't exactly a weekend excursion. Ludmilla sighed again. Leanne leaned on her armrest as she regarded the warrior woman. There was a strange condition to her seemingly unshakable resolve and infinite patience. If she was actively working towards solving a problem, she was the very picture of composure and temperance. If she felt that she couldn't do anything, she tied herself in knots and became increasingly temperamental. This was most often seen when she was out of her depth in civilian settings. Without the skills and training to function as a civilian noble, all she could do was brood, sigh and make scathing commentary. Maybe that was why she claimed to be at home on the battlefield. Problems could be solved by stabbing them, which she was exceptionally good at. They're here. Ludmilla rose to her feet. They are? Coming through the atrium, Ludmilla replied. I can't hear them directly, but a group of Clara's household staff is walking in unison towards this side of the palace. That must be 100 meters away. Leanne furrowed her brow, through 2 sets of doors and 2 flights of stairs. Even if they're here, Clara said, my household will still escort them to their accommodations and they will spend time preparing to meet us, unless they don't take baths. Ludmilla sat back down. Clara smiled. I wonder if you'll ever learn to harness that part of yourself, she said. Maybe in part, Ludmilla replied, but it's also something that I never want to lose. Why? Leanne asked. Because it's essential, Ludmilla answered. Aggression is crucial for warriors and we learn to focus it to good effect. Only when we have nothing to focus our aggression on does it become a problem. So she did realize that about herself. Clara went over to stand in front of Ludmilla. If you need to focus on something, Clara said, focus on fixing my dress. I have no idea what you messed up when you threw me. 15 minutes later,
Chief Venomscale and his entourage entered the stateroom. They joined them in the hall, where a long oak dining table had been set with jade porcelain and imperial silverware. The soft lighting set the arrangements aglow as Clara smiled warmly and addressed the Wyvern Rider Chief. "I hope our accommodations are to your satisfaction, Chief Venomscale." "We thank you for seeing to our needs, High Chief Corlin." Chief Venomscale nodded brusquely, though one must wonder why such extravagant preparations have been made. "Hundreds may be housed here, yet it is nearly empty." "This may be my home," Clara replied, "but it is primarily a place of gatherings. It is this large precisely because hundreds of people gather here, but because one does not have hundreds at any given time does not mean it cannot be used." Chief Venomscale grunted in reply. Each party took their seats facing one another. "Hey," he does the Zaradnik grunt. "Maybe Ludmilla can communicate with him better than we can. If you want to risk destroying the palace, sure. He could very well request a duel if we happen to get along. Is he that strong?" "He's at least as strong as I am. The three with him are all Mithril equivalent. Sorceress Kingdom Mithril." "Leanne, are they all this strong?" "How should I know? They all seem strong to me." "If they were, it would make sense that no one messed with them." "Is there any type of food that you cannot partake of?" Clara asked. "For cultural or religious reasons, perhaps?" "Picky eaters do not survive for long," Chief Venomscale said. "We are curious to see what the people here dine on." Clara nodded to the footman attending to her side. He bowed slightly before going to open the door. A procession of House Corlin's household staff carted in the first course of their meal. While Clara usually dined on the cuisine of the Riverlands, which was heavily influenced by the theocracy, she had opted for a northern menu to accompany their meeting. Her staff was practicing for the imperial guests that they would have over the summer and she saw no reason to change anything. A winter stew that featured a thick beef broth with generous portions of thinly sliced meat, cheese and cut potatoes led the way, accompanied by hearty barley bread. Ludmilla had suggested a carnivorous menu as Chief Venomscale was a warrior of some sort. Clara agreed, much to Leanne's dismay. Their guests seemed to appreciate it, however, so she supposed that it was worth the sacrifice. "I hope you'll forgive us going straight to your delivery of information," Clara said, "but Zaradnik here will be departing for the Draconic Kingdom tonight." "Tonight?" Chief Venomscale raised an eyebrow. "When do you expect to arrive, Chief Zaradnik?" "Tonight," Ludmilla replied. "I see. You have the bearing of a warrior but I cannot directly tell how strong you are. What would you ask of me?" Ludmilla set down her spoon, her gaze resting on each of the men across the table before speaking. "Since you've fashioned the map the way that you have, am I correct to assume that the territories of the Draconic Kingdom have been occupied and not destroyed?" "You assumed correctly," Chief Venomscale nodded. "Damage to the towns and cities appears to be limited, at least from above. Such is the way of these types of beastmen, is it not?" "We haven't had to deal with a beastman invasion before," Ludmilla said. "I have fought certain beastmen in the past, but none so advanced that they have come together to form a country." "A people having a country does not necessarily mean that it is advanced, Chief Zaradnik." "I'm sorry," Ludmilla lowered her head apologetically. "I didn't mean to offend." Chief Venomscale shook his head, waving Ludmilla's words away. "That is not what I said. What I am saying is that it is not any degree of advancement that results in a country. What is required to form a country is the strength to bring the peoples of the land under one power. Goblins with nothing but sharpened sticks can create a kingdom while societies ancient and advanced beyond reckoning may choose to remain in wilderness tribes." "I suppose my views are biased due to regional norms," Ludmilla said. "Thank you for your clarification, Chief Venomscale. When you say the way of beastmen, what do you mean by that?" "Beastmen eat meat. Meat is best kept fresh by keeping it alive." "Velp, there goes my appetite." 10 men slurped down the remainder of his soup. A maid came to replace his bowl with a new one. "How many of the Draconic Kingdom's citizens are left?" Ludmilla asked. "That, I do not know," Chief Venomscale answered. "I had no knowledge of the Draconic Kingdom's population prior to creating these maps." Clara took a sip of her red wine before joining their exchange. "What about the fields and pastures? Are people working on the farms?" Chief Venomscale glanced at the other Wyvern riders. Oracle cleared his throat. The farms there are not as active as the ones we flew over in this sorceress kingdom, he said. Those closest to the Beastman kingdom have perhaps half of the population their buildings suggest that they should have, but people are working in the fields there. The Beastmen don't attack them? Leanne frowned. Why would they do that? They exchanged puzzled looks over each other's questions. I believe I understand what's going on now, Ludmilla said. What of the Beastmen themselves? Do you know what races of Beastmen are present or their traits? A human and a Beastman look much the same when one is gazing down from high above, Chief Venomscale said. I can tell you what sorts of Beastmen sometimes intrude on our southern borders, but I cannot guarantee that they are the same. Please, do tell. Feeled Beastmen appear the most often, the chief said. I am uncertain if they are all the same race or not, but the ones that occasionally feed themselves to our wyverns are something like bipedal lions, tigers, jaguars, leopards and cougars. They make for good rugs and jewelry. What other types of beastmen are present to your south? There appear to be as many different beastmen as there are beasts, but those are what we have seen in great quantity. What about gnolls? Gnolls? Chief Venomscale chuckled. The hyena beastmen are the only threat to us out of all of them, so they were driven away from our region long ago. None have appeared in living memory. If they did, they would be hunted down. What of the Beastman Kingdom's equipment and combat methods? Many rely on their natural weapons, thick hides and massive bodies. Few have come to us equipped with metal. That part is strange. How so? Their equipment in general is mostly crude. Once in a while, however, one appears with a few exceptionally crafted pieces. That equipment is fashioned for use by beastmen, so we cannot say that they were trophies from the Draconic Kingdom. As for their combat methods, they end up being skewered from above by our envenomed javelins, so there isn't much to say. Well, that didn't seem helpful for you. On the contrary, it was very helpful. The paladins that I've spoken with have plenty of experience fighting the beastmen. This helps to reinforce what they've shared with me. With the nature of their aerial reconnaissance providing no detailed information on the Beastman Kingdom's forces beyond their overall progress and disposition, the conversation drifted to topics that centered around Chief Venomscale's visit to the Sorceress Kingdom. Ludmilla's mind had clearly drifted to her imminent task, but Leanne, Florian and Clara were more than happy to entertain their guests. By the end of the evening, they had agreed on a tentative schedule for the next day. Clara needed to go to Erantal to see the royal court about initiating their plans for the Draconic Kingdom, so Leanne and Florian would show Chief Venomscale's party around the city while she did. When the Wyvern riders retired for the night, Clara convened with the others in her drawing room on the palace's 4th floor. Aside from Ludmilla, they had all changed into their nightwear. Clara was in a black slip while Leanne and Florian were in silken white nightgowns that they had both picked up in our winter. In hindsight, it was a bad idea to wear them at the same time. They only seemed to amplify Florian's overwhelming appeal over hers. Still, having the whole floor of a palace to themselves was pretty nice. They could wear whatever they wanted for the whole day and see to their tasks in bed, on a couch or at a desk. Leanne could imagine Clara lazing about doing just that. Do you think the royal court will let us begin in light of these developments? Florian asked. That whole thing about keeping meat fresh made me sick to my stomach. But that should at least mean they're being kept alive instead of being subjected to wanton slaughter. Clara replied, when Ludmilla said the war was nearly concluded, I thought that 90% of the Draconic Kingdom had been lost. Seeing that nothing had been destroyed, Ludmilla said, I thought it might be something like that. The problem is Clara's question about the country's agriculture. Urban centers don't feed themselves. With the Draconic Kingdom's food production so drastically reduced, they're likely facing crippling shortages. So that was what the farm activity along the Beastman Kingdom border was all about? Florian's queasy expression grew. They're trying to make the people in occupied territories feed themselves, so they can be eaten later? That doesn't make much sense, Leanne said. They could have just stuck to raiding to achieve greater returns for less effort. I won't pretend to understand their side of things, Ludmilla said, but whether it is efficient or not is dependent on what their objectives are. Either way, all it took was the Beastman Kingdom deciding that they would do a better job at running the Draconic Kingdom than the Draconic Kingdom could. By Beastman standards, at any rate.